With this is we're going to divide this up and then section it off and then do a different technique for each one. So when we're done today, essentially you should have something that basically looks like this. Okay, so we're going to do a bunch of different type of techniques. I'm going to take you through pastel in terms of the nature of pastel, different techniques, things you might want to avoid in terms of working with it, and just the use of it. Okay. All right, so you're going to need a pencil. You don't need a ruler. I'm going to show you how to do this without a ruler in terms of sectioning this off. And get the cameras set up right. Okay, that works. All right, so to divide this up, we're going to divide up into 12 squares. So first off, we can divide this up into 3 rows, okay? And what I can do is kind of take my fingers and just kind of think about, thirds. This area has been 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So if I can sort of divide that up with my fingers, place them there on the side, now I can take my pencil and kind of put little marks there. And then I could measure that with my fingers also and kind of move those and see how I did. Looks like I need to go a little wider here. Doesn't have to be precise by any means, okay? So now I feel comfortable with my division. I'm going to then just, it's not like we're making a grid for a drawing or anything like that. So it doesn't have to be measured out and used with a ruler to make these lines. Okay, so now I got 3 rows there, okay? Now the next thing I'm going to do is divide this into 4s, but eventually let's just kind of start with a half first. So I'm going to think of where my middle is, kind of guess, put a mark there. Again, I could use my fingers to then kind of measure my results and see how I did. That's pretty good, so I move it over just a fraction this way to the right and divide that down. Okay? So now I'm going to divide these 2 sections up in half. And there's that. Okay. All right, so we're going to label these, what we're going to put into each one. And I will zoom in for that so you can see closer in terms of what I'm doing for each one. Okay, so for this top left corner, okay, we're going to put in blending. Okay, blending for our first one. Okay, so write that in top left corner. Blending. Okay. So for our next one, it's going to be broken color. Broken color. Oh, I held up to the wrong camera. Broken color. I got 2 cameras up here. I got one for my recording on the screen here and one for y'all up there. So next one is going to be hatching and cross hatching. Okay, so it's going to be hatching. It's going to be at the top. Oh, and then cross-hatching halfway down. So we're doing 2 in this one. Hatching and cross-hatching. Okay, that's in the third one. Hatching and cross-hatching. Now our last one we're doing feathering. It's on the top row. So feathering. Notice you're doing that in, y'all might be able to see that better. Feathering. That's in the top right, feathering. Now the next row, first one's going to be side stroke. Side stroke. Side stroke. Next one also going to be side stroke, but with layered. Side stroke. Layered. Side stroke layered. Next one's going to be pointillism. 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 And then the last one on that row is going to be scumbling. 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 What's that? The one before that was pointillism. Alright, so on our last row here, twist. Twist. And then next one is drawing. Drawing. And the next to last one, rolling / pressure. Rolling / pressure. If you haven't noticed, I do a blend between print and cursive. My I, N, and G kind of get blurred together. Cursive-esque. That's my new type of writing. Cursive-esque. Print cursive. Last one is dusting. So you see my T connected to my I. Kind of blur letters together a little bit. Artistic license with writing. Okay, you can see my E connects to my N. I grew up in the age of cursive. All right. All right. So essentially with pastels, let's talk about pastels a little bit before we even get into all this. Okay. So I think I'd asked before how many students had ever worked with pastels before? Chalk pastels? Okay. So chalk pastels, what they are, they're essentially pigments, the same kind of stuff they use in anything else like paint, color pencils, or anything like that, except it's in kind of this block form. and it's kind of loosely packed together, not really hard with the binder that's holding it together, but it makes it very dusty in that way, and also very messy. Okay, it kind of comes off very easily, very powdery, and these are soft pastels. Now they do make a pastel, obviously. Now I find pastels to be like the next thing to paint, like a drawing form of painting, because usually with painting, you got big brushes, that you can then spread stuff around, that you can cover real quickly. It's more like um, I don't know. It's not drawing is more like little fine points, where this can get. Imagine using the side of this pastel then to color something, the entire side of that. I mean, you can really cover a big area really quickly, right? Kind of like a painting. Um, but so they also make. So it's hard to get detail with that, but I'm going to allow you also possibly to use some of these, okay, at some point. And these are called new pastels. Now pastels, can range pretty expensive to pretty inexpensive. These are kind of a little more expensive in terms of this type. They're a little harder, and you can get a little bit more of a fine point with them. They're a little bit more rather than this kind of big, broad kind of tip there, obviously. So you can get a little more detail with that. And then you also have a chalk pastel. I think I do have some of those. At least I did. I got borrowed. Here we go. And so they, with these you gotta be careful. You really can't sharpen them with pencil sharpener. You have to use kind of like a knife. And I have seen some things get really detailed using like chalk pastels. Okay, so so if you're looking for more detail, the chalk pastel pencils are the way to go. Okay, but we're going to kind of make our things a little more painterly. It's landscape. If you want to make things more detailed with these, you have to get bigger. Okay, the bigger the picture, obviously your details are going to get bigger as well. Okay, all right. So at some point, obviously, we are going to want to clean, like wash our hands. Our hands are going to get really chalky. Once we really get working with these on our landscape, our surfaces are going to get covered in pastel. We're going to take our paper towels and wipe off those surfaces really good. Maybe even go back and wet these, or not soak them wet, just damp enough where then we can kind of wipe up any residue that's left as well. Because anybody that wants to come sit down at your table doesn't want to like put their arm on their table, especially if they got like long sleeves, and then it's all over their clothes. Okay, so we just want to make sure and clean up real well when we're done too. Okay, one thing in the past, a lot of times with pastels, it'll build up a lot of loose pastel. When you start working with it, it starts getting ground down. You'll get all this powder residue left over. I've seen a lot of students kind of blow that pastel off, that we're wearing masks now, so that would be pretty hard to do. But that can be a hazard. A lot of pastel artists who work with pastels all day long sometimes have to run a ventilation system to kind of keep that dust out of the air, because if you get enough of that pastel dust in the air, especially someone that has asthma, that could cause some problems. So we don't want to like get this stuff stirred up into the air by blowing it into the air. If anything, you can eventually, if you got a lot of excess pastel, you can kind of just sort of tap your paper on the side, and it'll end up on the table, which will make a mess. We got to clean up. But at least it's not airborne, okay? But a lot of times that pastel that we kind of use, if there's a lot of powder, we end up kind of putting that back onto the paper a little bit anyway. So we'll talk more about that, okay? All right, so we're going to start with this blending technique first, okay? Now I don't know what is going on with my computer because my other computer's sitting on it. Oops, maybe I've done something here. I can still see, so that's good. All right, so let me zoom in here to the blending. Okay, so we're going to do the blending first. Get that to go away down there somehow. Alright, so we're going to do blending first, okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to pick two colors. Pick maybe like a primary, and either from the primary colors or the secondary colors. That can be orange, red, green, blue, any of those kind of bright colors, okay? You can use any of those. Alright. So from there I'm going to, for ours, I am going to use a yellow, and I'll use actually a red this time. I used the blue last class. You just pick whatever two colors you want, as long as they're like a primary or secondary color. Alright, so for our first one, we're going to take one of our colors. I'm going to start going across the top here, kind of laying in some of that color, kind of going across just like that. And then I'm going to take some of my red color. You just pick whatever other color you pick. I'm going to start working over into the yellow so that they kind of eventually merge and overlap. Okay. So here I have some yellow without red in it. Here I have some red without yellow in it. And in the middle I have some yellow and red layered on top together. I'm going to put a little more yellow back on top of that. And you start to see really that kind of orangish color start to emerge. Alright. Now notice there's a lot of dust right there. There's a lot of dust that was created by doing all that. Okay. Now that's what I was talking about. Now we can use some of that dust because we're about to blend this. Okay. Now there are a couple of different ways to blend this. It's already kind of naturally started to blend just because the pastel was marked over one another, started pushing itself into one another. But the number one thing I usually use is my pinky. Okay, it's my smallest digit. You know, just to kind of tip my pinky, and I'll kind of go in there and kind of just push it around. You know, just kind of push that pastel into the paper. And that's where some of that dust really kind of becomes important, because you can use some of that, what's left over on the surface, then to be pushed around. So a couple of things happen when you do that. There's less white showing through, right? There's less white of the paper showing through, and therefore it kind of saturates the surface a little more. And has a little less that speckled look. Another thing we can do, and I'm just going to do this again, I'm going to put down yellow. And then put down my red again. Until they start to mix. Now I'm going to use my Q-tip. Now there's a problem with doing that. Okay, Q-tip is kind of going to wipe away some of that. Okay, my finger is pretty smooth surface. It doesn't really pull much of the pastel off. Although I did get some pastel on my finger, this Q-tip's going to actually pull up some of it, so it's going to get kind of lighter. And that could be a problem. You know, you may not want to get that light. And it just kind of takes away some of the pastel. Okay. Now, here's kind of a thing you could do with that, what's on the Q-tip though. Now that I've lifted some of that pastel, let's say I have a light area somewhere in my drawing. Okay. I might want to take some of that and then apply it I could take some of that that's on the Q-tip and put it somewhere. I could take some of the pastel that I accumulate on the tip of that and then use that to kind of apply in another area. The only thing about that is the Q-tip can get dirty and can get different things in it, and that's kind of will dirty up your color. Now my pinky, on the other hand, once I can wipe it off. I sometimes use the palm of my hand to kind of wipe off the pastel to clean it, or you can use a paper towel to wipe off your pinky, right? But then what I'll do is, if I do it, if I blend here in this orange area, my finger's all dirty with that. I can wipe that off. And then I can come over to the yellow area and blend in that yellow and not dirty the yellow area. Okay. Now, had I blended my red, my pinky, then I come over here to my yellow, I got red on there, look what's going to happen. It's going to dirty that yellow. So you always have to kind of think about whatever you're smudging or blending with, it can be dirty, and you may not want to get that into another area, okay? So if I wanted that to be a clean yellow again, what I would have to do, I could try to put some yellow back down over it, but I'm probably not going to get a bright yellow again. What I would really have to do, and I want you to try this, is I would have to erase it, okay? So in order to get that a bright yellow again, I'd have to erase that spot. Now that we're into erasing, okay, here's the problem. If I go to wipe that away, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to smudge everything, isn't it? If I sit there and wipe that off, look what I just did. I just smudged and smeared all that stuff, right? Because the debris that came from the erasing, I went to wipe it away. Now I just made a big mess. So what can be a better way to wipe away the debris from erasing is you could take like a paintbrush, okay? And you could just kind of lightly kind of go in there and knock that stuff out of the way. And now I didn't just kind of ruin my drawing by taking my finger and kind of going in and trying to smear or kind of move that debris from the erasing out of the way, okay? So if you use your hand to sit there and wipe away, you're just going to smear and blend everything, okay? So you might need a paintbrush to just kind of knock that stuff out of the way. Now I'm back to it's not necessarily white of the paper, but it's fairly white. It's kind of stained, but I can go in now and create a bright yellow, okay? Because I had to get back to the white of the paper to do that. Now some colors you can overlap or layer and they stay pretty bright, okay? Yellow is one of those that doesn't, okay? Now if I went over to this red and I tried to put a yellow on it, it'll do okay. That's okay, it's decent, but it still is kind of orange. Is that out of focus for y'all? Alright, so it still looks fairly yellow, okay? But it's not as yellow as it could have been. I went in and maybe erased a spot and then put the yellow in, if I can put it there. It's hard to be precision with pastels. So yellow is one of those things you just can't get. It's a light color, okay? And it just gets overpowered by everything else. Now if I took a dark color like red, and then I went to go on top of this yellow, boom, no problem. Red on top of it, no problem, because it's a dark color. It's a dark color, therefore it goes over a light color much easier. So, something like a red or a blue or anything like that might get a little influenced by the color underneath, but you can cover and you can layer with these pastels. Okay, you can put colors on top of colors and and it'll show on top. Okay, so you can layer. Okay. Now I do want to say something about white real quick. Okay. I know I'm spending a lot of time on this one, but it deserves it, okay? Um, white. With the white color pencil, if you try to use that white color pencil, nothing happens, okay? Nothing happens. But with this white, it does affect and change the color. So if I want to make a lighter version of this, I could put that white on it, and it'll get lighter, okay? So the white truly does have an effect on the pastel with chalk pastels, okay? So if you use white, it will lighten the color, okay? We essentially, if you remember with the color pencil, I'd use white of the paper, essentially to lighten the white color, the color pencils. All right, so enough of that. Let's talk about broken color, okay? This was essentially, we really smeared and blended the color together, right? Broken color we're going to do a little differently, okay? We're going to leave the color without mixing it, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some little dashes with my yellow. And these can be broad dashes, you know, not really detailed, thin, linear dashes, but I'm not trying to create rows and columns. I'm trying to keep things varied, okay? Now I'm going to take my red and do essentially the same thing. I may let it overlap or touch the yellow sometimes, but I'm really trying to get into those white spaces that I left in between. Now the idea behind this, you may have heard of Seurat, an artist who did the little dots. He did that painting Sunday luncheon or whatever, and it's just a bunch of dots. But you step away from it, you know, you don't see dots. And that's the thing here. If you made these small enough, they start to really blend together, and they already do. They start to visually mix to make a color, and it livens up the area a little bit. Now these are very contrasting colors in terms of light and dark, so it doesn't give a real good effect. But if you get colors that are really similar in value and do that, it's a really nice effect, especially if you do like a warm, cool color. So you get this broken color, right? Because you still see the colors in there, so it's broken. Now we can do this again, except we're going to do the broad side of the pastel. Now I'm not using the entire side of the pastel, okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lay this on its side, then pick up a little bit. And what that's going to do is give me this broad dash. I'm not using the entire side of the pastel. I'm just making this broad so I'm using, you can see right here where it made a clean spot on that pastel, right? And as you use it more, it'll flatten out that spot of the pastel, and you'll start to using more of that surface. So a lot of this has to do with mark making, you know, in terms of different types of marks you can make with this as well. So now I'm going to do the same thing with the red. Now, if your mark starts to kind of appear kind of repetitive, you can kind of try to turn it and see if you can create something, a little more variety in your mark. Because as soon as you start making a pattern that becomes a very distinctive pattern, it kind of gets, I don't know, distracting. So that's broken color. It's not blended. Now, you can start to blend a little bit. And this is something I do often. I want you to try this. So those things look very distinctive right now. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll take a finger, it could be my pinky, and I'll just kind of tap. I'll just kind of tap it. I'm not smearing or smudging necessarily. I'm just sort of tapping it. And what that's doing is doing just enough to kind of lift up some of the pastel and maybe even kind of blur the pastel a little bit, just so it kind of pushes it back a little bit. I'm not doing anything drastic. I'm just kind of slightly taking away its edge a little bit in terms of its, I guess its resolution, you know, how crisp it looks. Now I just kind of softened it a little bit. Okay, so you see how different this side is from this side. Just pushing down my finger and trying to take away some of that crispness. Okay? So you can get a different type of mark that way. Sometimes it's just all you need. Sure. If you're just doing that, you don't need that. All right. So, you know, we've already created sort of a nice variety of marks right there. We're going to continue with some of this mark making, okay? So hatching. Hatching is something you've probably done before. I'm going to use my red for this because it's really going to stand out. Plus, I'm starting to get a nice point on that, so I can get a good linear, thin kind of line. So try to find a kind of chisel point somewhere on your pastel and see if you can make some sort of fine kind of lines that are kind of side by side. And once that starts to wear down, you might have to find a new point if it starts to broaden on you. Then you can see how my first mark was kind of pretty thin, but then I got going across and kind of widened out a little bit because these pastels wear down real fast. Then I have to find another chisel point somewhere on my pastel to make a fine line again. Now cross hatching is essentially hatching with just lines then hatched the other way. So again, I'm having a hard time finding a good point here. Now I'm going to cross hatch it. There might be times where you want to do some cross hatching. It's a technique that's used a lot. And again with this could be something where it's just a little too contrasty. I could go in and just sort of knock it back a little bit just by padding on it with my finger. And the more I kind of pad down on it, up and down, the more it's just going to kind of get dimmer, paler and finer and less detailed. And that's just by me just sort of touching up and down motion with my pinky and just sort of padding on it, okay? It just sort of gives that softer kind of out of focus kind of look. So you can make obviously like atmospheric perspective really easily with pastels. Because right now that looks like atmospheric perspective. It looks like this is closer and this looks really far away just due to maybe some atmosphere that we're looking through or something. Okay? Alright, so feathering. Feathering is essentially kind of like hatching, except instead of these lines just kind of really stand out when they're really long like that. They kind of, I don't know, they just sort of catch your eye. And so sometimes what you can do to make lines is you can do hatching still, but kind of do them in kind of broken kind of little dashes. And it kind of looks like hair. You know, this is a great way to make hair. Or even grass for that matter. Or even if you're just trying to shade something and give it a little surface texture. And it just gives you a different look than just those long kind of lines. It's linear. It's definitely linear. It's just not the same as hatching. Okay. All right. So next row, side stroke. So what we can do is, like I said, this is a lot like painting because you can cover a big surface really fast. Particularly if you use the broad side of this pastel, right? So if I lay this pastel down on the side, just kind of grab it from the side and then just kind of pull with it. Now it really depends on what's underneath your table in terms of how it looks. Also, eventually this side will start to kind of start using, it'll kind of flatten out. You can see how it kind of left, that kind of left because it's just not completely flat or something could have been under my table. But the more I use it, the more consistent and the more that you'll start using more of the side of it. Okay. Now that in itself has a very nice texture, okay, which you might want, you know, in something. You might want that kind of grainy, rough kind of look. But obviously also you can go back in and kind of blend it. A lot of times when you're starting something, this is kind of what you'll do. You kind of lay down a layer of color and then maybe lay down another layer of color on top of it to kind of blend the color, to mix the color. And then you're kind of eliminating the white of paper. Now when we do ours, we will do something other than white paper. You know, white paper is not ideal for pastels because it generally does end up kind of poking through, and kind of use a tone paper will help kind of eliminate that, you know. So kind of, if it does peek through, which generally it will, at least it won't be white, okay? All right, so we'll use a tone paper, okay? So that's a side stroke. Now you can, like I was saying, like a lot of times you'll start something. Let's say I do a side stroke. Now, one thing I didn't do over here was you can do a side stroke that's not just a big fill-in area kind of thing. You can sort of make side strokes that don't go completely across the surface. You can kind of do something kind of like that, you know, not to where you're trying to fill in an entire area. But then if you take your other color and side stroke on top of that, this really starts to get into that broken color look, which is really nice. Where with the broken color up here, you had all this pattern showing up. This kind of looks really nice. You just kind of got this mottled kind of look. I guess you call that mottled. Mottled being sort of this kind of murkiness. You know, not these distinct marks, but something kind of murky, kind of mottled kind of look. But that has that broken color. Now, if I went in there with my finger, you know, I could blend some of that a little bit together a little bit if I wanted to kind of make it, you know, just take it another direction and then keep of it, you know, depends on what it is you want to do. Then on top of that, you might want to layer something else. Let's say I did want to, you don't have to do this, but I'm getting ready to pick another color. let's say I did take orange, and I kind of went on top of that a little bit. Now I got these kind of different layers of things kind of starting to happen. It just all depends, once those colors start to interact in those layers. So layering generally is something that you want to do in pastels. I don't know, I'm going to get crazy here. This blue is going to make kind of a brown, I'm sure, but now you got all these kind of different things interacting, okay? All right. So pointillism. Pointillism, this is going to get kind of noisy. And you don't have to hit that hard, okay? You really don't in order to do it. Again, we're talking about Seurat and his dots and dashes. With this, you can just kind of, you notice how I'm not making a lot of noise. You don't have to do that, okay? You can just kind of touch and just kind of, maybe kind of little mark making with that, but you don't have to like pound it, okay? I didn't tell my last class, and they were all just pop, 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 pop. But you can still make those little dots without having to you just kind of place it, kind of pull just a little bit, and it'll leave you a dot. Now, obviously, it takes a long time to do, to cover a big surface, right? And in that, again, you probably want to, who knows? Let's say like over here, you might have that there first, and then you kind of go in and lay your dots on top of that. And you might want that texture, okay? Maybe some small flowers, okay? So pointillism is something that you can do, is make dots. You could kind of, make kind of bigger ones, kind of squiggle back and forth. I don't know, maybe you get some tree with some berries on it or something. I don't know. Maybe some small flowers. Sometimes you might want to make kind of little pointed dotty type marks. Now, the next type of mark is going to be scumbling. Now, I got this demonstration from another person online, and this isn't normally what I would think of in scumbling, but for them it was more like kind of a meandering, kind of scribbly type of mark, okay? We're just sort of changing directions, sort of a small scribble. Now I can see where you might want that mark sometimes in flowers or nature, leaves maybe even. That you might want to do that. Okay. So that is described as scumbling. Again, you could touch it, knock it back a little bit. You could layer another color on it. You could do whatever you want to with that. Let's say I wanted to scumble some yellow on top of that. I could do that as well. And those layers can interact, and those marks can interact and create just another layer experience to that color. and a different type of texture. Again, kind of touch that, it kind of blends it in a little bit, whatever you're trying to do with it. All right, so we're on the last row. So we're down to twist, okay? So for twist, hopefully you can find a broad side of your pastel. This red's kind of might be a little difficult. I'm trying to find like a broad point to it. So what I'm going to do is kind of lay it down on this broad point and then kind of pull. Hopefully it'll start to kind of get more flat. And then just kind of twisting and turning as I make a mark. Sometimes getting this broad kind of look, sometimes getting this kind of thin kind of look. And that's kind of what we call the twist. All right, so for drawing. So, you know, generally when we start stuff, we start with pencil and we draw things out, and then we start to kind of do other things like color, right? Well, generally a pastel, pencil just doesn't look good with pastel. They don't match. So if you got pencil and it shows through your pastel, it really kind of sticks out. So a lot of times you might want to just start through drawing with your pastel. So, you know, you can get some nice lines with your pastel, you know, so that's something you might want to consider, you know, drawing with versus your pencil to kind of start your drawing, and it can be erased. So you can get very linear and these kind of like sort of contour kind of lines. Plus, if you're using the color of the object that you're about to color, you know, to draw out the lines, it'll kind of blend in and won't stick out like an outline. So, you know, using the color that you're going to use anyway to color the object and just use that to kind of make your contour can really help. So you can draw with it. All right, so this one's going to get kind of weird, kind of experimental. And this one really is kind of like rolling and kind of pressing hard and pressing lightly. So what you're doing is kind of taking it and then rolling it and not pressing hard and then pressing hard. It's more of a kind of a spontaneous, kind of creative way of sort of finding a mark. One without intention. That just sort of happens. Kind of experimental and sort of happens by accident. A little more spontaneity. Okay. All right, so this next one, you may not be able to do because I didn't give you a pair of scissors. So I'm going to demonstrate for you, okay? Let's say I've got like a field of yellow, right? And I kind of blend that in. And let's say for some reason I want some of the sort of this pointillism kind of look, except a little less distinctive. I can do something called like a dusting, okay? So what you do is you'll need something like a pair of scissors and like a piece of magazine paper, okay? And what you do is you kind of scrape across the pastel and that dust kind of just sort of comes off. And you can't really control it that well. You can somewhat. I can kind of move it around where I want it. But then I got this sort of what they call a dusting. Now to make that stay, if I just take the paper and kind of hit on the side, this stuff would fall off. This is where the magazine paper comes out. I kind of lay it down, and I kind of press down on the magazine paper. And then that should stay there. Okay, it's now pushed down into the paper. So that's something you can try when you get the chance. And you may not have a pair of scissors to do that with today, and that's okay. So don't worry about that one if you can't do that one, if you don't have something you can use. So I didn't expect you to, okay? I just wanted to demonstrate. So there's one thing I want to show you that I really want to show you what not to do, okay? And I'm going to demonstrate that on a separate piece of paper. I'm going to show you what I see a lot of times, what I see students do. When they got colors, they're coming up to next to one another, okay? Let's say I got a shape here. Let's just say I got this area of this color, right? And then I want to color up next to it with this yellow. I'm going to color up to this object, right? Now obviously if I color up to this and I get into it, you know, and it touches at the edge, it's like I'm going to get this kind of color mixture of the two right there at that edge, or it might kind of blur together, right? And I realize that's something you may not want. You might want a nice, we're all clean up here in just a minute, okay? Just be patient. So in order for that not to happen, you just got to be careful, okay? But let me show you what students often do to be overly careful, okay? They will take, let me make that red again. Let's say this is your shape. This is what I'll see. They'll take their next color, color up to it, and then stop short of coloring up to it. So now we got this little white border, right? And I'll see a lot of times this little white border around all their shapes, right? So it's like outlined with this white kind of no pastels on, right? Just because they're trying to be so cautious of not letting them touch and kind of getting smear and blend together. In order for it not to happen, you just got to be careful. You just got to color right up to the edge and just be cautious. And then if, you know, you just got to be very, very careful. Now realize, you know, if you got small detailed shapes, you know, that pinky isn't getting small enough really to really kind of get in there. And again, you just got to slow down or find another way. Maybe the Q-tip, that's where it'll come involved. Or there's some other things we can blend with too, okay? All right, so we made a mess. We feel like a mess. We got it all over us, right? Here's what you got to do, all right? Before everybody gets out of your seat, what you can do, you know, see all that pastel right there? Let's just say all that's on my table. You know, you take your paper towel, you can wipe, just wipe your table, wipe any pastels you see, maybe turn the paper towel over and wipe again. And at some point, if we get a lot of pastel on this table, we might have to dampen the cloth and come back to your table and wipe as well. Because what would be bad is if some other student come in behind you next class, sat down, their sleeves just kind of got on the surface, and saying, oh, they got pastel all over their sleeve. Okay, that's not a pleasant thing. Okay, so we want to make sure our surfaces are nice and clean when we're done. Okay. All right, so your pastel drawing. What are you going to do with this pastel drawing? You're going to need to turn that in.